There is a kind of pain that no enemy could ever inflict, a wound so personal, so deep, that it does not come from strangers but from those who share our blood. It is the betrayal of family, the people who were meant to be our refuge, our source of love and protection, turning into the architects of our suffering. The sting of their words, the weight of their judgment, the wounds inflicted not with weapons but with silence, manipulation, and indifference, these cut deeper than any sword. Have you ever wondered why some of the greatest battles in life are not fought against the outside world but within the walls of our own homes? Why is it that the very people who were supposed to lift us up are often the ones who break us the most? Why does love, the very thing meant to heal, sometimes become a tool for control and destruction? This is not a new struggle. Since the dawn of time, the human story has been marked by betrayals within the family. Cain and Abel, Joseph and his brothers, David and King Saul. Even Jesus himself was rejected by his own people. And perhaps that is where the greatest pain lies, not just in the wounds themselves, but in the disbelief, in the sorrowful realization that those who should have known us best, those who should have loved us the most, are often the very ones who turn against us. But why does God allow this? Why does He permit such suffering to come from those who were meant to be our greatest supporters? Could it be that He is teaching us something deeper about love, about strength, about who we are meant to become? When family becomes the source of our suffering, we are faced with a choice. Do we allow their words, their treatment, and their rejection to define us? Or do we rise above, recognizing that our worth is not determined by the approval of men, but by the love of God? God never intended for us to live in bondage, even to those who share our blood. He never asked us to sacrifice our peace, our purpose, and our joy on the altar of family expectations. Some believe that walking away from toxic family members is an act of betrayal. But is it truly? Or is it an act of obedience and acknowledgement that God has not called us to live in pain, but in peace? Consider the life of Joseph. His own brothers envied him, despised him, and ultimately conspired to destroy him. They threw him into a pit, selling him as a slave, robbing him of his home, his security, and everything he had known. But even in betrayal, God's plan did not waver. The very thing that was meant to destroy him became the foundation for his destiny. Joseph did not stay in the pit. He did not beg to return to the home that had rejected him. He walked forward, trusting that God was leading him to something greater. What if the suffering you have endured is not meant to break you but to elevate you? What if the rejection you have faced is not a punishment but a redirection? What if, in your pain, God is showing you who truly belongs in your life and who does not? It is a difficult thing to accept, but not everyone who shares your blood is meant to walk with you on the journey God has designed for you. Some people will love you only when you fit into their expectations, when you obey their unspoken rules, when you live according to their desires. The moment you step into your own calling, the moment you choose to stand in your own truth, the moment you decide to prioritize peace over approval, their love turns cold. But is that truly love? Is love conditional? Is love manipulative? Does love require you to shrink yourself just to make others comfortable? God's love is not like that. His love does not require you to suffer in silence. His love does not ask you to tolerate abuse for the sake of keeping the peace. His love calls you to something higher, to protect your heart, to guard your spirit, to walk in the identity He has given you, even if it means walking away from those who refuse to see your worth. There is a guilt that comes with stepping away from toxic family relationships. Society tells us that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that we must endure, no matter the cost. But God never said that. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that you must subject yourself to harm simply because someone is related to you. In fact, the Bible warns us repeatedly about the dangers of staying connected to those who bring destruction into our lives. Do not be deceived, bad company ruins good morals. 1 Corinthians 15:33. This does not apply only to friends or outsiders. It applies to anyone who poisons your soul, even if they are family. And so I ask you, how long will you allow yourself to be trapped in the cycle of pain? How long will you endure the weight of their words, the burden of their expectations, the exhaustion of trying to prove your worth to those who refuse to see it? There comes a time when you must choose. Do you remain in the same place, hoping that someday they will change, that someday they will love you the way you have longed to be loved? Or do you step forward, not in bitterness, not in anger, but in faith, believing that God has something greater for you beyond the walls of the place that has hurt you? God does not call you to be a prisoner to anyone's mistreatment. He calls you to peace. He calls you to wisdom. He calls you to strength. And sometimes He calls you to walk away. Because at the end of your days, when you stand before Him, He will not ask if you pleased your family. He will ask if you fulfilled your purpose. He will ask if you walked in the peace He prepared for you. He will ask if you lived as His child or as a captive to the expectations of others. So I ask you again, who will you choose? Them or God? Love is a sacred gift, designed by God to heal, to nurture, and to uplift. But what happens when love is twisted into something else? What happens when love is no longer given freely, but wielded as a tool for control? There are those who claim to love you, yet their love comes with conditions, with expectations, with unspoken rules that demand your submission. This is not love. This is bondage. And the most dangerous kind of captivity is the one disguised as love. Many suffer in silence under the weight of family control, convinced that obedience is the same as honor. But honor is not slavery. Honor is not silence in the face of oppression. Honor does not mean allowing yourself to be manipulated in the name of love. If love demands that you surrender your identity, if love insists that you live in fear, if love requires you to suppress your God-given purpose to meet another's expectations, then it is not love at all. Control often enters in the smallest of ways. It starts with guilt, subtle remarks, lingering disappointments, words that make you question yourself. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You think you're better than us now? A real son would never act this way. A good daughter would obey. It is a poison wrapped in familiarity, a manipulation so skillful that you begin to believe you are the problem. You start to shrink yourself, make yourself small, so that they do not feel uncomfortable with your growth. But God never created you to live in chains. His love is not manipulative. His love does not burden you with guilt. His love does not trap you in a cycle of obligation where you must constantly prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. Even Jesus, when confronted with his own family's misunderstanding, did not allow himself to be controlled by their expectations. When they sought him, assuming they had a right to dictate his actions, he turned to his disciples and said, "Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?" Matthew 12:48. This was not a rejection of his earthly family. It was a declaration that true family is not based on control, but on spiritual alignment. If even Christ did not allow earthly ties to dictate his divine purpose, why should you? Why should you be bound by those who claim to love you but refuse to support your calling? Why should you live in the shadow of their expectations when God has called you into his light? But control does not always come in the form of words. Sometimes it is in their silence, the absence of love, the withdrawal of affection, the cold distance that appears when you refuse to conform. You notice it when you stop living for their approval, and suddenly they act as though you no longer exist. They punish you not with anger, but with indifference. And so you return, desperately trying to earn back their warmth, willing to sacrifice yourself just to feel like you belong again. But the question is, belong to what? A family that only accepts you if you obey. A love that disappears the moment you refuse to be controlled. That is not the love of God. That is the love of man. And the love of man is fickle, conditional, and fragile. God's love does not hold you hostage. It does not force you to be someone you are not. It does not shame you for becoming who he created you to be. There comes a moment when you must recognize the difference between love and control, between honor and enslavement, between duty and destruction. Ask yourself, does their love bring you peace, or does it bring you fear? Do their words bring you closer to God, or do they fill you with doubt? Do they support your growth, or do they demand that you stay small so they can remain comfortable? God did not create you to live in fear of those who claim to love you. He did not design you to be a prisoner in your own family. He calls you to truth. And the truth is this: love that demands your silence is not love. Love that requires your suffering is not love. Love that controls, manipulates, and binds you in guilt is not love. It is chains wrapped in the illusion of belonging. And God has come to break every chain. Boundaries are not walls of selfishness, they are gates of wisdom. They do not keep love out, they keep harm from entering. Yet when it comes to family, setting boundaries can feel like an act of betrayal. The guilt creeps in like an uninvited guest, whispering that you are being ungrateful, that you are turning your back on the people who raised you, that to love your family means to endure all things, even their mistreatment. But God never commanded you to destroy yourself in the name of keeping the peace. There are those who believe that family has an unlimited right to your time, your mind, your emotions, even your obedience. They believe that love means access to your thoughts, your choices, your future. And when you try to step away, when you dare to say no, when you choose to protect your peace, they call it disrespect. But is it truly disrespect, or is it self-preservation? Consider Christ himself. Though he walked in perfect love, he did not allow himself to be controlled by the expectations of others. When his own family sought to interrupt his teaching, assuming their relationship gave them authority over him, he did not rush to please them. Instead, he declared, "My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it." Luke 8:21. He did not deny his earthly family, but he refused to let them dictate his mission. If even Christ, in his boundless wisdom, set boundaries, how much more must we? Yet the moment you begin to distance yourself from toxic family dynamics, the accusations begin. You've changed. You think you're too good for us now. Family is supposed to stick together. But ask yourself, are these the words of love or the words of control? Does true love demand that you sacrifice your peace, your joy, your sanity? Does love require that you allow yourself to be mistreated simply because of a shared last name? There is a lie that many believe that setting boundaries is an act of rebellion and abandonment of duty. But in truth, boundaries are an act of faith. They are a declaration that you trust God enough to separate yourself from what is harmful, even if that harm comes in familiar hands. They are an act of obedience because God never calls his children to be prisoners of manipulation, even when that manipulation comes in the form of family expectations. Some will never understand your boundaries. They will see your distance as rejection, your silence as defiance, your decision to walk in peace as an insult to their authority. But the truth is, people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always be offended when you finally set them. They have grown accustomed to having access to your life without permission. They have built their comfort on your discomfort, and when you finally choose to step away, they will not applaud your growth. They will condemn it. But God does not. God does not call you to endure abuse in the name of family. He does not require you to suffer endlessly to prove your love. He has called you to peace. He has called you to wisdom. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 22:3. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are wisdom. They are the gates that separate what is harmful from what is holy. They are the voice that says, "I love you, but I will not allow you to destroy me." And if there are those who refuse to respect your boundaries, if there are those who insist that love means control, then perhaps it is not your boundaries that need to change, but your understanding of who truly belongs in your life. Because love that refuses to honor your peace is not love at all. There is a silent prison that many live in, a prison not made of walls and bars, but of opinions. It is the fear of disappointing family, the need for their approval, the desperate attempt to be seen as worthy in their eyes. Some spend their entire lives in this captivity, molding themselves into versions that please others, suppressing their own identity for the sake of keeping the peace. But there is no true peace in this kind of life, only exhaustion, only a slow, quiet suffocation of the soul. Family opinions can be the heaviest burden to carry. They shape how you see yourself, how you measure success, how you define your worth. And yet, if you listen closely, you will hear the whispers of God asking, whose voice matters most? The world is loud, but God is gentle. The world demands, but God invites. The world sets conditions, but God's love is unconditional. If you continue to live in the shadows of their expectations, you will miss the light of His calling. Some families believe their opinions are law, that their approval is the highest validation, that their acceptance is the measure of your worth. But God does not measure you by their standards. He does not define you by their criticisms. He does not see you through their limited perspective. And so the question is not whether they approve of you, it is whether you will finally detach yourself from the weight of their judgment and walk in the truth of who God has made you to be. Jesus Himself faced rejection from His own people. His wisdom was questioned. His miracles were doubted. His purpose was ridiculed. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they sneered. "Isn't his mother Mary? Aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas?" Even in His divinity, He was dismissed by those who thought they knew Him best. But He did not waste time proving Himself to those who refused to see. He did not plead for their approval. He did not bend His purpose to fit their expectations. Instead, He continued forward, unwavering, untouched by their disbelief. And yet, so many of us live trying to prove ourselves to those who will never truly see us. We seek love from those who withhold it, validation from those who refuse to give it, and acceptance from those whose hearts were never open to us in the first place. But why? Why do we place the weight of our identity in the hands of those who treat it carelessly? If their opinions of you determine your peace, then your peace is built on shifting sand. If their validation is what gives you confidence, then your confidence will crumble the moment they withdraw it. If their approval is the foundation of your self-worth, then your worth is fragile, dependent on the moods and mindsets of others. But God never intended for you to live this way. He did not design you to be a puppet moved by the strings of family expectations. He created you with a unique purpose, a calling that cannot be contained by their limited view of who you should be. Some will never understand your journey. They will question your choices, ridicule your faith, and criticize your growth. They will say you have changed, that you have strayed, that you have abandoned the traditions that once defined you. But they do not see what God sees. They do not hear what He has spoken into your life, and they do not know the weight of the calling upon you. You were never meant to live according to their expectations. You were meant to live according to God's purpose. And yet, so many people remain trapped, unable to detach, because the thought of their disapproval feels unbearable. But let me ask you, who is your master? Them or God? Whose approval will matter at the end of your life? Theirs or His? Let go of the need to be understood by those who refuse to understand you. Detach from the weight of their opinions, for they are not the author of your destiny. If Jesus Himself could not make everyone believe in Him, why do you expect to make everyone believe in you? God does not require you to be accepted by them in order to bless you. He does not need their permission to move in your life. And if they choose to misunderstand you, to judge you, to speak against you, so be it. Their words do not hold power over your destiny. Their opinions do not dictate your future. You are free. But the question is, will you walk in that freedom, or will you remain bound to their judgment? The choice is yours. There comes a moment in life when you must ask yourself a difficult question: who truly belongs in my life? Not by obligation, not by blood, but by purpose. who speaks life into your spirit, who encourages you to walk in the path God has set before you, who strengthens your faith rather than weakens it. These are the people who belong with you. These are the relationships that nourish your soul. Many believe that family is an unbreakable bond, that blood is the highest form of connection, that no matter what, we must endure even if that endurance comes at the cost of our peace. But God does not call you to keep people close simply because of shared lineage. He calls you to keep people close because of shared spirit. Can two walk together unless they are agreed? Amos 3:3. If those around you do not align with the path God has placed you on, if their presence hinders your spiritual growth, then perhaps it is not family you need to prioritize but faith. The right people are not always those you grew up with. Sometimes they are strangers who become family through shared purpose, through shared faith, through shared devotion to the truth. Jesus himself redefined family, saying, "Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Matthew 12:50. This was not a rejection of his earthly family. It was a declaration that true family is not about where you come from, but about where you are going. If the people you call family are the ones who bring you down, who manipulate, who speak against your dreams, who laugh at your faith, who discourage your purpose, then what kind of family is that? Family is not meant to be a prison. It is meant to be a refuge. And if it has become a place of harm rather than healing, then it is time to find those who will walk with you in truth. But many hesitate. Many remain in toxic environments because they fear loneliness. They believe that stepping away will leave them isolated, abandoned, unloved. And so they endure, convinced that any relationship, even a harmful one, is better than none at all. But that is a lie. God has not called you to suffer in the presence of those who despise your growth. He has called you to step into the presence of those who will strengthen your spirit. Abraham had to separate from Lot before he could step into his full blessing. The Israelites had to leave Egypt before they could walk into their promised land. Even Jesus had to step away from his own people when they rejected him. A prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. Matthew 13:57. If even the Son of God was rejected by those closest to him, why do you expect anything different? There is a danger in staying connected to the wrong people for too long. Their voices become louder than God's. Their opinions begin to shape your decisions. Their doubts become your doubts. Their negativity seeps into your faith. And before you realize it, you are no longer walking in purpose, you are walking in their expectations. But God has prepared people for you. People who will understand you without explanation. People who will lift you up when you feel weak. People who will pray for you, fight for you, and walk with you. These are the ones who belong in your life. These are the ones who will remind you of who you are when the world tries to make you forget. But finding them requires one thing: you must first be willing to let go of those who do not belong. You cannot make room for the right people if your life is still filled with the wrong ones. You cannot walk with those who drain you and expect to find those who will sustain you. You must have the courage to separate, to step forward, to trust that God will not leave you alone. Jesus had 12 disciples, but even among them, he had 3 who were closest to him: Peter, James, and John. Not everyone was meant to go where he went. Not everyone was invited to see what he saw. And so it is with you. Some people will only walk with you for a season. Some people were never meant to stay. And some people must be left behind for you to move forward. It is not cruelty. It is not selfishness. It is wisdom. If they do not feed your faith, if they do not bring you closer to God, if they do not encourage your growth, then perhaps they were never meant to walk this road with you. Let them go, and trust that God will bring the right people at the right time. Because true family is not defined by blood, it is defined by spirit. And the right people, the ones chosen for you by God, will never require you to diminish yourself just to be accepted. When family turns against you, when their words cut deeper than a knife, when the people who should love you the most become the source of your greatest pain, Where do you turn? If your foundation has always been in their approval, if your peace has always depended on their acceptance, then their rejection will shake you to the core. But if your foundation is in God, if your identity is rooted in His truth, then no amount of betrayal, no amount of criticism, no amount of manipulation can break you. Pain has a way of driving us either toward God or away from Him. Some, when faced with the coldness of family, become bitter, angry, hardened. They close their hearts, believing that if even their own blood does not love them, then love itself must be an illusion. Others sink into despair, believing the lies spoken over them, carrying the weight of rejection like an unbearable burden. But there is another way, a higher way. When family becomes the enemy, when their love turns to control, when their acceptance is replaced with disapproval, it is not a sign that you are alone. It is an invitation to trust God more deeply than ever before. Throughout Scripture, we see the pattern: those who are chosen by God are often rejected by men. Joseph's own brothers threw him into a pit. Moses was rejected by his people before he led them to freedom. David was despised by his own brothers before he became king. Even Jesus, the Son of God, was mocked and disbelieved by his own family. If this pattern exists, then perhaps rejection is not the end of your story, but the beginning of something greater. But to see this, you must shift your perspective. If you believe that your worth is determined by how your family treats you, then their rejection will feel like a curse. But if you understand that God alone defines you, then their rejection becomes a tool away for Him to separate you from what is not meant for your destiny. God allows certain relationships to break so that you can lean on Him fully. He removes certain people from your life so that your faith is no longer in them, but in Him. When everything else falls away, when the voices of family fade, when their love is no longer there to hold you up, what remains? God. He remains. And He is enough. This is the moment where you decide, will you put your trust in man, or will you trust in God? Man's love is fragile, conditional, ever-changing. One day they praise you, the next they curse you. One moment they celebrate you, the next they tear you down. But God's love is steady. It does not shift with opinions. It does not fade with time. It does not depend on how well you meet expectations. His love is pure, eternal, unshakable. When you begin to trust God more than you trust people, their words lose power over you. Their opinions no longer define you. Their rejection no longer cripples you, because you understand that their approval was never your source of identity. God was, and He still is. But trust is not just about knowing God loves you, it is about believing that He has a plan, even in your suffering. It is about standing firm when everything around you falls apart. It is about holding on to faith when family turns their backs on you, knowing that what they meant for harm, God will use for good. Joseph had every reason to be bitter. His own brothers hated him, stripped him of his dignity, sold him into slavery, but he did not allow their betrayal to define him. He trusted that God was still in control. And in the end, what happened? He rose to power, and those same brothers who tried to destroy him had to stand before him, needing his mercy. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis 50:20. What if your rejection is not a curse, but a setup for something greater? What if their cruelty is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your testimony? What if God is using this pain to strengthen your faith, to draw you closer to Him, to refine you in the fire, so that you emerge stronger, wiser, and unbreakable? Faith is not just believing in God when everything is easy, it is trusting Him when everything feels like it is falling apart. It is choosing to believe that He is working even when you cannot see it. It is standing firm, even when the people you love most walk away. This world will disappoint you, people will fail you, family will hurt you, but God, He remains. And when you strengthen your faith in Him, when you choose to trust Him above all else, you will find a peace that no betrayal can shake, no rejection can steal, no enemy can destroy. because your foundation is no longer built on the fragile love of man, but on the unshakable love of God. Forgiveness is one of the hardest lessons to learn, especially when the wounds have been inflicted by the very people who should have protected you. When family becomes the source of your pain, when their words and actions cut deep into your soul, the natural response is to hold on to resentment. The pain becomes a heavy weight, and bitterness begins to grow like a vine around your heart, tightening its grip with each memory of betrayal. You replay the past, the moments of rejection, the unkind words, the manipulation, the times they made you feel small. And yet, God calls you to do something that feels impossible to forgive. But what does forgiveness really mean? Many misunderstand it, believing that to forgive means to forget, to excuse, or worse, to allow the same pain to continue. That is not forgiveness. That is self-destruction. True forgiveness is a release. It is letting go of the burden of resentment so that it no longer poisons your soul. It is not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let the past control your future. Forgiveness is not about pretending that what happened didn't hurt you. It is not about allowing toxic people to remain in your life unchecked. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. It is setting yourself free from the chains of anger and bitterness so that they no longer have power over your emotions, your peace, your mind. It is refusing to carry their wrongdoing in your heart any longer. But understand this: forgiveness does not mean access. Too many people believe that forgiving someone means allowing them to continue hurting you. That is not wisdom. That is not what God commands. Jesus himself forgave those who crucified him, but he did not place himself back in their hands. He did not return to those who mocked him, beat him, and rejected him just to prove that he had forgiven them. He moved forward with his purpose. And that is what you must do. Forgive, but do not enable. Do not allow yourself to be mistreated under the false belief that forgiveness means tolerance. Forgiveness is about freeing your heart, not making yourself a victim again. There is a reason the Bible tells us, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? 2 Corinthians 6:14. This applies even to family. If someone's presence in your life brings only pain, manipulation, and destruction, then removing yourself from that environment is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Some people will never change. No matter how much you forgive them, no matter how many chances you give, they will continue to take advantage of your kindness. They will twist your mercy into an opportunity to control you further. They will use your love as a weapon against you. And so the question you must ask yourself is this: are you truly forgiving them? Or are you allowing them to keep hurting you? Boundaries are not a lack of forgiveness, they are a sign of wisdom. You can love someone from a distance. You can pray for them without allowing them to poison your life. You can wish them well without giving them access to your peace. Jesus walked away from places where he was not welcome. He left behind those who refused to see his worth. He did not stay to convince them, to plead for their understanding, to demand their love. And neither should you. There will be those who say, but they are family. You must keep them close. But ask yourself, what does family truly mean? Is family simply those who share your blood, or is it those who share your spirit? The Bible tells us that family is more than flesh and blood. Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Matthew 12:50. If a family member is leading you away from God, if they are draining your spirit, if they are breaking your soul rather than building it, then you must ask, what kind of family is that? It is possible to love someone and yet walk away from them. It is possible to forgive someone and yet no longer allow them to hurt you. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can show is removing yourself so that their actions no longer find a victim in you. Sometimes the only way someone will ever realize the weight of their behavior is when they no longer have the opportunity to continue it. Forgiveness does not mean you owe them endless access to your life. It does not mean you must endure suffering just to prove your love. Forgiveness is releasing the bitterness from your heart, trusting that God sees all, and allowing Him to be the judge. Let go of the anger. Release the resentment, but do not hand them the keys to your peace again. Because to forgive does not mean to forget, it means to move forward, free from the burden of their wrongs, and firm in the boundaries that protect your spirit. There comes a moment in life when you must choose between pleasing others and protecting your peace. When family becomes a source of conflict rather than comfort, when their words are laced with manipulation instead of love, when their presence drains your spirit rather than strengthens it, then the choice becomes clear. Will you continue seeking their approval at the cost of your own well-being? Or will you choose peace, even if it means walking alone? For many, the desire for family approval is ingrained from childhood. From a young age, we are taught to obey, to conform, to seek validation from those who raised us. We are conditioned to believe that family acceptance is the highest form of belonging, and so we shape ourselves to fit their expectations. We silence our thoughts to avoid their criticism. We sacrifice our dreams so they will be pleased. But at what cost? What happens when the approval you seek comes with a price too high to pay? When your peace is shattered, when your soul feels burdened, when every interaction leaves you feeling drained, unseen, and unheard, what then? Does the approval of others still hold value if it comes at the expense of your own joy? God never called you to live in bondage to the opinions of men. He did not design you to be a puppet controlled by the expectations of others. His desire is for you to walk in the peace that He gives, not the temporary, fragile approval of those who only love you when you conform to their will. Jesus Himself never sought approval from men. He did not tailor His words to please the religious leaders of His time. He did not soften His truth to gain favor with those in power. He spoke what was right. He walked in purpose, and He remained unmoved by the opinions of others. I do not accept glory from human beings. He declared in John 5:41. His mission was not to win the approval of men, but to fulfill the will of His Father. And if even Christ did not live for the validation of others, why should you? Yet, so many live imprisoned by the fear of rejection. They continue to endure mistreatment just to avoid conflict. They suppress their voice so they do not upset those who never truly valued them. They bend, they shrink, they disappear within themselves, all in the desperate hope that one day their family will see their worth. But what if they never do? What if no matter how much you give, no matter how much you change, no matter how much you sacrifice, it will never be enough for them? That is when you must choose. You must choose to stop chasing love that refuses to be given freely. You must choose to stop performing for people who will never applaud your authenticity. You must choose to stop exhausting yourself in a game you were never meant to win. You must choose peace, not just any peace, but the peace that comes from God, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. John 14:27. The peace of God is not dependent on whether your family accepts you. It does not rise and fall based on their moods, their judgments, their approval. It is steady, unshakable, eternal. It is the peace that allows you to walk away from toxic relationships without fear. It is the peace that enables you to release the need to be understood. It is the peace that gives you the strength to say, I love you, but I will not destroy myself for you. Some will not understand your decision to choose peace over approval. They will call you selfish. They will say you have changed. They will accuse you of abandoning your family. But what they fail to see is that choosing peace is not an act of rejection, it is an act of self-preservation. It is recognizing that God has not called you to a life of constant conflict and sorrow, but to a life where you can breathe freely, where you can grow, where you can flourish in His purpose. Look at the life of Abraham. When conflict arose between him and Lot, he did not cling to the relationship out of obligation. He did not fight to keep peace where peace no longer existed. He chose to separate. He chose to step away, trusting that God's plan for him did not require him to remain bound to a situation that no longer served him. And what happened? Once Abraham parted ways with Lot, God's blessings over his life became even clearer. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever." Genesis 13, 14, 15. Sometimes your greatest blessings can only come once you release what is holding you back. There will be those who try to guilt you into staying in dysfunction. They will remind you of everything they have done for you, everything they have given, everything they expect in return. But love should never be a transaction. If their love requires you to suffer, it is not love, it is control. If their acceptance depends on your silence, it is not acceptance, it is manipulation. If their peace comes at the cost of your own, then it is not peace at all. God is not calling you to seek validation from people who refuse to see your worth. He is calling you to walk in the peace that He provides. A peace that allows you to release the need for approval. A peace that silences the voices of doubt. A peace that reminds you that your worth is not found in the acceptance of others, but in the embrace of your Creator. And when you finally choose that peace, when you stop living for their approval and start living for God's purpose, you will feel something you have not felt in a long time: freedom. Freedom from the weight of their expectations. Freedom from the burden of trying to be enough. Freedom to be exactly who God has called you to be. Because in the end you do not answer to them. You answer to God. And His approval is the only one that truly matters. There comes a moment in life when you must decide who you will live for God or the expectations of others. When family, the people who should have been your greatest source of love, become the ones who bring you the most pain, you must make a choice. Will you continue striving for their approval, exhausting yourself in an endless battle for validation? Or will you step away, protect your peace, and trust that God has something greater for you beyond their acceptance? God never called you to be a prisoner to the opinions of others, not even those who share your blood. He did not design you to live in fear of rejection, to shrink yourself so others feel comfortable, or to suffer in silence for the sake of keeping the family together. He called you to walk in truth, in purpose, and in peace. And sometimes that means letting go of what no longer serves your spirit. Choosing to distance yourself from toxic relationships is not an act of hatred, it is an act of self-preservation. It is acknowledging that love should not come with conditions, that true family is found in those who support your growth, and that your worth is not determined by whether others approve of you. You are not here to fulfill their expectations, you are here to fulfill God's purpose. Forgive, but do not allow yourself to be used. Set boundaries, but do not feel guilty for protecting your peace. Love them from a distance, but do not sacrifice your joy to fit into a space that was never meant for you. And above all, trust that God is leading you somewhere greater, somewhere free, somewhere filled with the love and support you deserve. The people who truly belong in your life will never require you to diminish yourself to be accepted. And those who cannot love you as you are were never meant to stay. Walk away if you must, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in faith that God is guiding your steps, faith that He will surround you with the right people, and faith that your peace is worth more than anyone's approval. Because in the end, when you stand before God, He will not ask if you pleased your family, He will ask if you fulfilled the purpose He placed upon your life. And when that day comes, may you stand before Him, not burdened by the expectations of men, but free, whole, and at peace, knowing you chose Him above all else.